I want to talk prospects. And somebody suggested this to Anthony and I the other night. And I said, you know what? Bruce is going to be on Tuesday, and this is the perfect guy to ask. And the criteria was basically, who are the most untradeable prospects? Another way to think about it, like, who are the most valuable prospects, the guys you would only be willing to give up if it meant getting an immense return. So the number one guy on your list is going to be the most valuable. In this case, you rank 28. 28 would be the least valuable on this list. My criteria to you were these had to be players born in 1999 or later. And I made two exceptions. I said Gavin Stone and River Ryan, who are both 1998 guys. They belong on this list because the spirit of the argument includes them. So this list includes the young guys on the roster like Andy Pajes, Emmet Sheehan, Haesung Kim, Justin Robleski, Kasperius Dreyer, etc., plus all of the top prospects that are in the Dodgers organization as well. So you ranked 28 guys, which I love, and you broke them into 4 tiers. Tier number 1, which we'll get to last, is like, these are the guys that are headliners for studs. Tier 2 is headliners for a supplemental piece. Tier 3 are kind of like trade sweeteners, and tier 4 are kind of like depth pieces to fill out a trade. So let's start at the bottom. I'll fire through these. Tier 4 is kind of like, I wrote down, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they're sort of like throw-ins. And what I mean is they're not free. It's not nothing. These aren't guys the Dodgers are eager to give away, but you're probably not losing sleep over any of these guys. The 7 that you have in this tier, starting from most valuable in the tier to least valuable in the tier, are Kyle Hurt, Landon Knack, Bobby Miller, Will Klein, Paul Gervais, Ortiz, and Nick Frasso are the 7. I'll tell you just from the get-go, Landon Knack being in this tier is the name that jumps out to me the most. And I think it's just me personally. I know the ceiling on Landon Knack is not especially high. I just feel like he's a major league pitcher, Bruce. And so that's why it's surprising to me, but I think it speaks more to the Dodgers' depth than it does anything else.
Yeah, I think last year was a tough year for Knack to not have really established himself in the big leagues a little bit more. I agree with you. Like, I don't want to make this sound like it's I'm low on the end and that kind of thing. I think he's a guy that as soon as he gets a chance, a real chance, not like what he had last year, I think if he gets a real chance, he can be a back end starter in a big league rotation, and I think it'll be okay. But he didn't prove it last year like he hopefully could have. And I think that in terms of where his value is left on the trade market, it's in this tier of, like you kind of described it as, of these aren't the guys that when you're talking to another team, they're going to be the first ones you talk about. It's more like once the package is already mostly done, then who can you add in at the last couple pieces, like third or fourth options to fill out a package.
The third tier we'll move on to. This is a list of guys who are either third pieces in a huge trade or second pieces potentially in a smaller one. Again, from most valuable to least valuable in the tier. Alex Freeland, Edgardo Enriquez, Haesung Kim, Ben Kasperius, Serwinowski, James Tibbs, and Ryan Ward on this list. This feels like, to me, the tier that just screams out how much depth there is in the Dodgers organization. Because I look at this and I'm like, Ben Kasperius is in tier number 3. Alex Freeland, top 100 prospect, is in tier number 3. And yet, talk me through this tier a little bit and maybe who was the hardest guy to put in this group.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's a perfect way to describe it, that the Dodgers just have a lot of really good trade depth right now. And that when I say that, it's not that they have to trade guys away. It's just there's a lot of good assets in the organization, right? Like you just said it, Alex Freeland was a top 100 prospect last year. There was a lot of places he was getting up into the top 50s, and he didn't have a totally overwhelming big league debut, but it was a very short one. And I don't think that that's really going to have a huge impact on his trade market. So I think these are all guys that you're really talking about making a great, when we're talking about some of the top trade names available, like we just talked about Jarren Duran and Steven Kwan, it's going to take multiple valuable pieces. Like you need at least a duo or a trio of really valuable players at the top of a package to get a trade like that done. And that's the tier that you're pulling from here, where you throw in a headliner or two, and then you pull from this tier 1 or 2 guys that really complete a package. And these are all really valuable players that other organizations would be looking at as some of their most valuable trade pieces.
Ben Kasperius, I mentioned him earlier. I was surprised to see him this low. The Dodgers obviously did not value him enough to use him in the postseason or in the second half of the season for that matter. Is that a reflection, do you think, on a guy whose stock has dipped a little bit, or is it simply, hey, the organization's deep?
I think it's a little bit of both. The tough thing for Kasperius, and the reason that he's a little bit lower here and he's not in the headliner category, is just because it doesn't look like he's going to be a starting pitcher.
Okay.
I was still holding out hope last year heading in that he might be able to be like a 5 and dive kind of starter, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. He had a brief stint in the starting rotation last year that was a train wreck, and it kind of was the turning point. And when he was back end, like one of the best relievers the Dodgers had at the beginning of last year, then that starting pitching stretch happened, and he kind of never got all the way back on, firing on all cylinders. So I think that reliever who didn't end last year on the highest of notes can't be ranked that high on a list like this. But he still has so much potential. Like everybody knows the stuff is crazy with Ben Kasperius. So he can't be put down too low, because even if he is a reliever, he can be a damn good one.
Yeah. Okay. Tier number 2. Again, these are guys who would be like the top end for sort of a supplementary piece or a secondary piece in a bigger trade. Again, from highest ranked on this list to lowest ranked in this tier: Robleski, Dalton Rushing, Eduardo Quintero, Jackson Ferris, Mike Sirota, Jack Dreyer, and Emil Morales. I'll just give you my observations real quick and then let you talk. This feels like Justin Robleski has moved way up this list, which I've always loved Robleski, so I love to see that. And also Dalton Rushing has dropped way down this list as well. Jack Dreyer is in this group. To me, I don't know if you would agree, he would have been the hardest one for me to rank on this whole thing, because he's a left-handed reliever that doesn't wow you with stuff, and yet he was the Dodgers' best reliever for an entire season and got big outs in the World Series. So how do you value that compared to a guy like Dalton Rushing? But talk me through Robleski, Rushing, Quintero, Ferris, Sirota, Dreyer, and Emil Morales.
Yeah, so Robo, I've been high on for a couple of years now, of thinking this guy really has the stuff to be a good starter. And this year he got back to pitching with the confidence that he had in the minor leagues. And he really, obviously he got huge outs in the World Series for the Dodgers. So now he looks like a guy that, whether it's as a multi-inning reliever, I think ultimately his stuff still is plenty good enough to start. That's a really valuable guy who has figured out the mental side of the major leagues. And that is a really big thing when you're talking about projecting out future success. For Rushing, I have him here, not necessarily, I wasn't thinking of it as like I'm dropping him down a ton. I understand that is a easy thing to see when he's down this low, but I think I'm speaking to, we just talked about the depth with that third tier of those guys in the third tier. It's not like they aren't still very valuable pieces. It's the same thing here. This second tier, I kind of envision as can be headliners or second pieces when you're talking about a bigger trade candidate like Jarren Duran or Stephen Kwan. They might be a second guy in the package. And I think Rushing was underwhelming enough last year that he lost the luster of, you're not going to get top 10 prospect in baseball value anymore, but you're still talking about a catcher with 5 full years of big league service left and control, and still a high ceiling to get to. So I don't think his value has fallen too far.
Okay, tier number 1. I'm going to go from 7 to 1. So the first guy I'm going to mention is 7th most valuable on your list, going all the way up to number 1. You've got River Ryan, Roki Sasaki, Gavin Stone, Josue de Paula, Zaire Hope, Andy Pages, and number 1 on the list, which I'm so glad and completely agree with you on, is Emmet Sheehan on this list. There's 2 questions that I have for you: Pages, de Paula, and Hope, and how you rank those 3. Is it as simple as we have seen one of these guys actually do it at the major league level, and that matters a lot?
There's that, and then there's also the center field aspect for Andy Pages. Of Josue de Paula is obviously a big gray area with the glove of, you hope he'll be good enough in a corner. Zaire Hope actually, I think, might have a slight chance to still play center field, but Andy Pages is a really good center fielder, and so that matters a lot, alongside the fact we have seen him do it in the big leagues.
Okay. On the flip side, Gavin Stone, Roki Sasaki, and River Ryan. Good luck ranking those 3. 2 guys who missed all of last year, and the guy who was the number 1 prospect in all of Major League Baseball in some lists a year ago. Then it looked like he was cooked in Roki Sasaki. Now it looks like he's back. You have him 6th on this list.
Yeah, I think Roki's real tough to evaluate right now, because there still would be teams that would love to trade for the ceiling and hope they figure it out. Like any team that has a good pitching development lab would love to get their hands on Roki. Obviously, he was back to being an out-getter in the postseason. you look a little bit under the hood, and it's not like he was getting whiffs. This command still looks out of sorts sometimes. The fastball wasn't always triple digits. So I don't think that like he figured it all out again. And we'll see how it translates when he's starting games again. So like you said, this trio is really tough to evaluate because Gavin Stone, I also have a little bit higher than Sasaki and Ryan, but that is a razor thin deficit there because Gavin Stone coming off a labrum, I am terrified about. You can look at the last guy on this entire list down in tier 4 of Nick Frosso as a good example of why I am terrified about recovery from a labrum. We also haven't really heard anything about Gavin Stone for the entire season, which worried me a little bit. I was hoping there was going to be at least whispers of like he's throwing again, but haven't heard anything there, which is not an indicator of anything either direction, but no reassurance to be had basically. Ryan is coming back from an elbow. He's got the better stuff than Gavin Stone. The ceiling is certainly higher. I just thought Gavin Stone did it for a little longer in the big leagues in his rookie year. And there was a time that Gavin Stone looked like a guy that, could throw 6 pitches and you hope once he's healthy again will be a, innings eater and just a steadfast part of the rotation. River Ryan's the guy that you're hoping gets healthy and for 6 years is like a number 2 starter caliber kind of guy that is just whiff city and stuff that is good enough to really be a high impact guy.
And then Emmet Sheehan's number 1 on this list. So guys this age, what I say, 20, 26 and under, basically. Sheehan is number 1 on the most untouchable list for you.
Yeah. Emmet Sheehan is going to be a really, really good starting pitcher. Like now.
2.8 ERA this past season. 2.8.
Yeah, he is. So Emmet Sheehan's a guy that I was counting the days in his rehab getting back last year. And it was so great to see him back on the field and looking as good as he did. I don't care one single little lick about a couple of the postseason outings he had out of the bullpen that didn't go great. I don't care. He's got plenty of stuff to be a really good starting pitcher. The slider has gotten better. His fastball is still super lively. I really love his changeup, and I'm hoping that he's going to start leaning on that changeup a little bit more to both handiness of hitters, and I think it's plenty good enough to make him effective against lefties too. So I think Emmet Sheehan's the guy that is going to have an even more expanded role moving into the future for the Dodgers as we talk about this rotation that they don't want anybody throwing 150 innings and that whole 9 yards. Emmet Sheehan is a really huge piece of the Dodgers being able to manage innings like that because he is not in that tier of aces, but he's not very far behind it either. And so the flexibility he provides by being as good of a starter as he is, any team in baseball would love to have a guy like Sheehan.
And so real quick, like if we talk about guys that might be available via trade, a Steven Kwan type, I look at this first tier and maybe I'm a prospect hugger. Sheehan, Pages, Hope, Paula, Stone, Sasaki, Ryan. Obviously Stone, like who knows, like you said, Ryan's a question mark. I wouldn't trade any of those guys for Steven Kwan, I don't think.
I think you'd have to if you want to get a Kwan trade done. I think it's going to take at least one guy from this first tier. It might even be like a guy from the first tier, a guy from the second, and a guy from the fourth or something like that.
Yeah. And to me, again, it's like to trade that much for a player with the profile and the ceiling of Steven Kwan, that's where I struggle. Like, okay, I'm getting a glove first corner outfielder who maybe can play center field, who's never going to hit for power, who best case scenario is like a 115 weighted runs created plus guy. Man, that's hard for me to get behind when it's like you're asking me to trade either Paula or Hope, who are like top 10 prospects in Major League Baseball, depending on where you look, or Stone or Sasaki or Ryan or Pages, who's already, there, or Sheehan. That's I agree that that's going to be the ask. And that's why I'm so hesitant on a Kwan trade.
See, I could stomach it if you're talking from the bottom of this first tier. Like if the Guardians were willing to absorb maybe Gavin Stone and the risk that comes with that injury rehab alongside one of the guys from tier 2, like Sirota or Ferris. You hope you wouldn't trade 2 pitchers there. So I'm just spitballing names, but
like Sirota or Quintero plus one of these pitchers.
It would hurt.
Ryan or Stone.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, it would hurt, but I think there's a world where I could be okay with it. I also think there's an elephant in the room here that when we're talking about these trade pieces, you mentioned it to me, like everybody wants to know is Tarek Skubal, like which tier here is the Tarek Skubal untouchables. And to be honest, first of all, I don't think the Tigers are going to trade him. Second of all, the Dodgers have a lot of depth here and a lot of great talent. I still don't even know if this list is enough to go get Tarek Skubal if he became available. Like that's just another world. Same with like the pipe dream of Paul Skeens or anything like that. That's a different conversation to have. That's going to include big league talent that is not on this list, because it's going to be, you'd have to go to the table with literally nobody off limits.
Yeah, I mean, if they said, "Hey, we want Sheehan, Paula, and Hope," like, are you listening? Are you saying yes to that?
I think so. Yeah, I think it would cost a lot more than that.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about what these guys go for. And obviously, every time we see these trades, different organizations have different values placed on some of these players. So there's a chance that the Dodgers have somebody in your second or third tier as a guy they value a lot more. And there's possible they're looking at one of these guys in the top tier and saying, you know, we actually would be perfectly fine moving on from that player because we don't think he's as good as everybody else thinks. And so it's interesting. So again, Bruce, I appreciate this list. There's 28 names on there. You're a guy who studies prospects and follows the Dodgers farm system. So it's really good information. And again, Emmet Sheehan at the top of this list, I totally agree. Andy Pages at 2 on this list is, I know there's going to be people that are like, really, Andy Pages? They just saw him have one of the worst postseasons ever offensively. And yet this guy almost probably should have been an all-star. And they have a bunch of years of team control left, and he's young, and he has the potential to kind of check every box, whether it's power, whether it's defense, whether it's the arm. So if he can get some of the mental pieces cleaned up and some consistency there, it's possible that Pages has a ton of value. So awesome stuff. I'd love to hear from people in the comments below what you think about this list, because if there's one thing we know, prospect lists can be a pretty polarizing thing.
I'll say here too, I'll go ahead and post this list on Twitter right now. So if you want to get a visual here to have it all come in your mind to make sense, I know it's hard to follow when we're just reading it out. So go to my Twitter account if you want to look at that and be able to put together your thoughts that way, because it might be confusing.
At bnicholas7, by the way, on that one.